returning to The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Previously read, I believe it was chapters 8 through 15. Like I said, I'm a little rough around the edges today, so I'm not going to be able to do quite that many chapters today. Chapter 16, The Cemetery of the Chateau d'If. On the bed, at full length, faintly lighted by a dim ray that entered through the window, Dantes saw a sack of coarse cloth, under the ample folds of which he could distinctly discern a long, stiff form. It was Faria's shroud. All was over then. Dantes was separated from his old friend. Faria, the helpful, kind companion to whom he had become so attached, to whom he owed so much, existed now but in his memory. He sat on the edge of the bed and became a prey to deep and bitter melancholy. Alone. He was quite alone, once more, alone, no longer to see, to hear the voice of the only human being that attached him to life. Would it not be better to seek his Maker, as Faria had done, to learn the mystery of life even at the risk of passing through the dismal gates of suffering? The idea of suicide, which had been dispelled by his friend and which he himself had forgotten in his presence, rose again before him like a phantom beside Faria's corpse. "If I could only die," he said, "I should go where he has gone. But how am I to die? It is quite simple," said he with a smile. "I will stay here, throw myself on the first one who enters, strangle him, and then I shall be guillotined." Dantes, however, recoiled from such an infamous death, and swiftly passed from despair to an ardent desire for life and liberty. Die? "Oh no," he cried out. It would hardly have been worth while to live, to suffer so much, and then to die now. No. I desire to live, to fight to the end. I wish to reconquer the happiness that has been taken from me before I die. I have my executioners to punish, and possibly also some friends to recompense. Yet they will forget me here, and I shall only leave this dungeon in the same way that Faria has done." As he uttered these words, Edmund stood stock still, with eyes fixed like a man struck by a sudden and terrifying idea. "Oh, who has given me this thought?" he murmured. "My God, comes this from thee? Since it is only the dead who go free from here, I must take the place of the dead." Without giving himself time to reconsider his decision, and as though he would not give reflection time to destroy his desperate resolution, he leaned over the hideous sack, slid it open with the knife Faria had made, took the dead body out, carried it to his own cell, and placed it on his bed, put round the head the piece of rag he always wore, covered it with the bedclothes, kissed for the last time the ice-cold forehead, endeavored to shut the rebellious eyes which were still open and stared so horribly, and turned the head to the wall so that when the gaoler brought his evening meal, he would think he had gone to bed as he often did. Then he returned to the other cell, took the needle and thread from the cupboard, flung off his rags that the men might feel naked flesh under the sacking, slipped into the sack, placed himself in the same position as the corpse, and sewed the sack up again from the inside. If by any chance the gaolers had entered then, they would have heard the beating of his heart. Now, this is what Dantes intended doing. If the gravediggers discovered that they were carrying a live body instead of a dead one, he would give them no time for thought. He would slit the sack open with his knife from top to bottom, jump out, and taking advantage of their terror, escape. If they tried to stop him, he would use his knife. If they took him to the cemetery and placed him in a grave, he would allow himself to be covered with earth. Then, as it was night, as soon as the gravediggers had turned their backs, he would cut his way through the soft earth and escape. He hoped the weight would not be too heavy for him to raise. Hello, Peanut. Welcome in. He had eaten nothing since the previous evening. But he had not thought of his hunger in the morning, neither did he think of it now. His position was much too precarious to allow him time for any thought but that of flight. At last, toward the time appointed by the governor, he heard footsteps on the staircase. He realized that the moment had come. He summoned all his courage and held his breath. The door was opened. A subdued light reached his eyes through the sacking that covered him. He saw two shadows approach the bed. There was a third one at the door, holding a lantern in his hand. Each of the two men who had approached the bed took the sack by one of its two extremities. "He is very heavy for such a thin old man," said one of them as he raised the head. "They say that each year adds half a pound to the weight of one's bones," said the other, taking the feet. They carried away the sham corpse on the bier. Edmund made himself rigid. The procession, lighted by the man with the lantern, descended the stairs. All at once Dantes felt the cold, fresh night air and the sharp northwest wind, and the sensation filled him at once with joy and with anguish. The men went about 20 yards, then stopped and dropped the bier on the ground. One of them went away, and Dantes heard his footsteps on the stones. "Where am I?" he asked himself. "He is by no means a light load, you know," said the man who had remained behind, seating himself on the edge of the bier. Dante's impulse was to make his escape, but fortunately he did not attempt it. He heard one of the men draw near and drop a heavy object on the ground. At the same moment a cord was tied around his feet, cutting into his flesh. "Well, have you made the knot?" one of the men asked. "Yes, and it is well made, I can answer for that." "Let's on, then." The bier was the bier was lifted once more, and the procession proceeded. The procession proceeded. That is amusing. And the procession proceeded. The noise of the waves breaking against the rocks on which the chateau is built sounded more distinctly to Dantes with each step they took. "Wretched weather," said one of the men. "The sea will not be very inviting tonight." "Yes, the Abbe runs a great risk of getting wet," said the other, and they burst out laughing. Dantes could not understand the jest. Nevertheless, his hair began to Nevertheless, his hair began to stand on end. "Here we are at last." "No, farther on, farther on." "No, farther on, farther on. You know the last one was dashed on the rocks, and the next day the governor called us a couple of lazy rascals." They went another 5 yards, and then Dantes felt them take him by the head and feet, swing him to and fro. 1, 2, 3. With the last word, Dantes felt himself flung into space. He passed through the air like a wounded bird, falling, ever falling with a rapidity which turned his heart to ice. At last, though it seemed to him like an eternity of time, there came a terrific splash, and as he dropped like an arrow into the icy cold water, he uttered a scream which was immediately choked by his immersion. Dantes had been flung into the sea, into whose depths he was being dragged down by a cannonball tied to his feet. The sea is the cemetery of Chateau d'If. Oof. That is rough. Hello, everyone. Once again, we are between chapters, so I think I'm doing okay so far. I definitely can feel it around the edges of my throat a little bit, so I'm just gonna remind myself to stay hydrated. Mm. Which you should all do so as well. Um, I might need to have a conversation with my mods. I've been thinking about adding some like redeems on gaming stream days where I do like squats or arm curls or something. I haven't decided what's what, but there's a few creators out there that do them, and I really appreciate it. And I often will follow along when they do a activity. I'll do it myself. But yeah, everyone stay hydrated, caffeinated, grab a snack, whatever you need to, and we'll continue with chapter 17. More squat squad, absolutely. Chapter 17. The Isle of hmm, Tipoulin, probably. The Isle of Tipoulin. Though stunned and almost suffocated, Dantes had yet the presence of mind to hold his breath, and, as he grasped the open knife in his right hand ready for any emergency, he rapidly ripped open the sack, extricated his arm and then his head, but in spite of his efforts to raise the cannonball, he still felt himself being dragged down and down. He bent his back into an arch in his endeavor to reach the cord that bound his legs, and after a desperate struggle, he severed it at the very moment when he felt that suffocation was getting the upper hand of him. He kicked out vigorously and rose unhampered to the surface, while the cannonball dragged to the unknown depths the sacking, which had so nearly become his shroud. Hey, Deathloss. Dantes merely paused to take a deep breath, and then he dived again to avoid being seen. When he rose the second time, he was already 50 yards from the spot where he had been thrown into the sea. He saw above him a black and tempestuous sky. Before him was a vast expanse of dark, surging waters, while behind him, more gloomy than the sea and more somber than the sky, rose the granite giant, like some menacing phantom, whose dark summit appeared to Dantes like an arm stretched out to seize its prey. He had always been reckoned the best swimmer in Marseille, and he was now anxious to rise to the surface to try his strength against the waves. To his joy, he found that his enforced inaction had not in any way impaired his strength and agility, and he felt he could still master the element in which he had so often sported when a boy. An hour passed. Exalted by the feeling of liberty, Dantes continued to cleave the waves in what he reckoned should be a direct line for the Isle of Tipoulin. Suddenly it seemed to him that the sky, which was already black, was becoming blacker than ever, and that a thick, heavy cloud was rolling down on him. At the same time he felt a violent pain in his knee. With the incalculable rapidity of imagination, he thought it was a shot that had struck him, and he expected every moment to hear the report, but there was no sound. He stretched out his hand and encountered an obstacle. He drew his leg up and felt land. He then saw what it was he had mistaken for a cloud. 20 yards from him rose a mass of strangely formed rocks, looking like an immense fire petrified at the moment of its most violent combustion. It was the Isle of Tiboulin. Dantes rose, advanced a few steps, and with a prayer. Thank you, Sina. Dantes rose, advanced a few steps, and with a prayer of gratitude on his lips, stretched himself out on the jagged rocks, which seemed to him more restful and comfortable than the softest bed he had ever slept on. Then, in spite of the wind and storm, in spite of the rain that began to fall, worn out with fatigue as he was, he fell into the delicious sleep of a man whose body becomes torpid, but whose mind remains alert in the consciousness of unexpected happiness. For an hour he slept thus, and was awakened by the roar of a tremendous clap of thunder, a flash of lightning that seemed to open the heavens to the very throne of God, illuminated all around, and by its light he saw about a quarter of a mile away, between the Isle of La Mer and Cap Croisille. Croisille, I think, Cap Croisille. Between the Isle of La Mer and Cap Croisille, a small fishing boat borne along by the wind and riding like a phantom on the top of a wave only to disappear in the abyss below. A second later it appeared on the crest of another wave, advancing with terrifying rapidity. By the light of another flash, he saw 4 men clinging to the mast and rigging. A 5th was clinging to the broken rudder. Then he heard a terrific crash, followed by agonizing cries. As he clung to his rock like a limpet, another flash revealed to him the little boat smashed to pieces, and amongst the wreckage, heads with despairing faces and arms stretched heavenward. Then all was dark again. There was nothing left but tempest. By degrees the wind abated. The huge gray clouds rolled toward the west. Shortly afterward, a long reddish streak was seen along the horizon. The waves leaped and frolicked, and a sudden light played on their foamy crests, turning them into golden plumes. Daylight had come. It must have been 5 o'clock in the morning. The sea continued to grow calm. In 2 or 3 hours, Dante said to himself, the turnkeys will enter my cell and find the dead body of my poor friend. Recognize him. Seek me in vain and give the alarm. Then they will find the aperture and the passage. They will question the men who flung me into the sea and who must have heard the cry I uttered. Boats filled with armed soldiers will immediately give chase to the wretched fugitive who, they know, cannot be far off. The cannon will warn the whole coast that no one shall give shelter to a naked, famished wanderer. The spies and police of Marseille will be notified, and they will beat the coast, while the governor of Chateau d'If beats the sea. And what will become of me, pursued by land and by sea? I am hungry and cold, and have even lost my knife. I am at the mercy of the first peasant who cares to hand me over to the police for the reward of 20 francs. Oh God, my God, thou knowest I have suffered to excess. Help me now that I cannot help myself. As Dantes finished this fervent prayer that was torn from his exhausted and anguished heart, he saw appearing on the horizon what he recognized as Genoese Tartan, a small one-masted vessel. Genoese? I think it's Genoese. As a Genoese Tartan coming from Marseille. To think that I could join this vessel in half an hour, if it were not for the fear of being questioned, recognized as a fugitive, and taken back to Marseille, said Dantes to himself. What am I to do? What can I say? What story can I invent which might sound credible? I might pass as one of the sailors wrecked last night. So saying, he turned his gaze toward the wreck and gave a sudden start. There, caught on a point of rock, he perceived the cap of one of the shipwrecked sailors, and close by still floated some of the planks of the unfortunate vessel. Dante soon thought out a plan, and as quickly put it into action. He dived into the sea, swam toward the cap, placed it on his head, seized one of the timbers, and turning back, struck out in a direction which would cut the course the vessel must take. The boat changed her course, steering toward him, and Dante saw that they had made ready to lower a boat. He summoned all his strength to swim toward it, but his arms began to stiffen, his legs lost their flexibility, and his movements became heavy and difficult. Breath was failing him. A wave that he had not the strength to surmount passed over his head, covering him with foam. Then he saw and heard nothing more. When he opened his eyes again, Dantes found himself on the deck of the Tartan. A sailor was rubbing his limbs with a woolen cloth, another was holding a gourd to his mouth, and a third, who was the master of the vessel, was looking at him with a feeling of pity which is uppermost in the hearts of most people when face to face with a misfortune which they escaped yesterday, and of which they may be the victim tomorrow. "Who are you?" the skipper asked in bad French. "I am a Maltese sailor," replied Dantes in equally bad Italian. "We are coming from Syracuse, laden with wine and grain. We were caught in a storm last night off of Cape Morgion, I think. Last night off of Cape Morgion, and we were wrecked on the rocks you see yonder. Where have you come from?" "From those rocks over there. Fortunately for me, I was able to cling to them, but our poor captain and my 3 companions were drowned. I believe I'm the sole survivor. I saw your ship, and I risked swimming towards you. Thank you," he continued. "You have saved my life. I was lost when one of your sailors caught hold of my hair." Syracuse, important ancient seaport in southeastern Sicily. "It was I," said a sailor with a frank and open face, encircled by long black whiskers. "It was time, too, for you were sinking." "Yes," said Dantes, holding out his hand to him. "I know, and I thank you once more." "Lord, but you nearly frightened me," the sailor replied. "You looked more like a brigand than an honest man, with your beard 6 inches long and your hair a foot in length." Dantes suddenly recollected that neither his hair nor his beard had been cut all the time he had been at Chateau d'If. "Once, when I was in danger," he said, "I made a vow to the Madonna of Piedigrotta? Piedigrotta. Okay. Madonna of Piedigrotta, not to cut my hair or beard for 10 years. The time is up this very day, and I nearly celebrated the event by being drowned." "Now, what are we going to do with you?" asked the skipper. "Alas, do with me what you will," replied Dantes. The bark I sailed in is lost. My captain is dead, and I nearly share the same fate. Fortunately, I am a good sailor. Leave me at the first port you touch at, and I shall be sure to find employment in some merchantman. Take the helm and let us see how you frame." The young man did as he was bid. Ascertaining by a slight pressure that the vessel answered to the rudder, he saw that, without being a first-rate sailor, she was yet tolerably obedient. "Man the lee braces," he cried. The 4 seamen who composed the crew obeyed, whilst the skipper looked on. "Haul away," they obeyed. "Belay." This order was also executed, and instead of tacking about, the vessel made straight for the Isle of Rion, leaving it about 20 fathoms to starboard. "Bravo!" said the captain. So the lee braces are ropes controlling a sail on the side away from the wind. Makes sense to add tension. "Bravo!" said the captain. "Bravo!" repeated the sailors. And they all regarded with astonishment this man whose eye had recovered an intelligence and his body a vigor they were far from suspecting him to possess. "You see," said Dantes, handing over the tiller to the helmsman, "I shall be of some use to you, at any rate, during the voyage. If you do not want me at Leghorn, you can leave me there, and with the first wages I earn, I will pay you for my food and for the clothes you lend me." Oh gosh. Welcome in, Librophiles, and Red Lethal Pandan, thank you for the raid. Hello, everyone. Raiders, my name is Vexing Cat. I am a Tiger Librarian VTuber. I read classic literature and poetry. Today, I'm reading The Count of Monte Cristo. This is part 3 of this series. I am part of Underrealm Gen 2. I am part of a larger VTuber group of, there's 12 active VTubers and one, I guess, is Elmo a streamer? I don't know. I regardless. So we have a couple of other people on staff as well that assist with administration and moderation as well. But if you're not familiar with our content, you should come check out Underrealm, !Underrealm. For you Librophiles who are here and not familiar with Red Lethal Panda, variety streamer, gamer, super chill vibes. They are going through the process of having a new live 2D model. No secrets, no spoilers, but I gotta tell you, I've laid eyes on it. It looks c'est magnifique. Seems appropriate since I'm reading from a French author. But yeah, Raiders, chill out, relax, grab something to drink, something to eat, chill out. I'm just gonna be reading this story. I'll probably be at it a little bit shorter today than I usually shoot for 3 hours, but my throat's still sick. So thank you for the head pats. Also, Librophiles that are here
before you
that we're not aware. Panda is also Gizmo in the Dreadship campaign on Tuesdays on Wild's page. So you can look forward to seeing that tomorrow. Haha. I am as well as I can be. Last week was stressful and I got sick and I'm still recovering from that. And I slept most of the weekend, but I still am not 100%, unfortunately. But we ball. I missed out on 2 streams last week and I don't want to. 3. Math bad. Yeah. Missed out on streaming three opportunities last week and I don't want to miss out this week. All right, continue on. Also, thank you for all the new follows.
Hajimoto Miu just followed.
Hagamoto Mew, thank you for the follow. You see, said Dantes, handing over the tiller to the helmsman. Yes. I shall be of some use to you. At any rate, during the voyage, if you do not want me at Leghorn, you can leave me there, and with the first wages I earn, I will pay you for my food and for the clothes you lend me. Very well, said the captain. We can fix things up if you are not too exacting. Give me what you give the others, returned Dantes. Hello, what's the matter at the Chateau d'If? Exclaimed the captain. A small white cloud crowned the summit of the bastion of the Chateau d'If. At the same moment, the faint report of a gun was heard. The sailors all looked at one another. A prisoner has escaped from the Chateau d'If, and they are firing the alarm gun, said Dantes calmly. What is the day of the month? He presently asked of Jacopo, the sailor who had saved him and who now sat beside him. The 28th of February. What year? Have you forgotten that you ask such a question? I was so frightened last night, replied Dantes with a smile, that I've almost lost my memory. What year is it? The year 1829, returned Jacopo. It was 14 years to the very day since Dante's arrest. He was 19 when he entered the Chateau d'If. He was 23 when he escaped. A sad smile passed over his lips. He wondered what had become of Mercedes. Thank you, Peanut. Welcome in.
Peanut _up_ duty just
A sad
followed.
smile passed over his lips. He wondered what had become of Mercedes. Who must now believe him dead? Then his eyes flashed with hatred as he thought of the 3 men to whom he owed so long and cruel a captivity. Against Danglars, Fernand, and Villefort, he renewed the oath of implacable vengeance which he had vowed in his dungeon. For context, for those that weren't here for earlier parts of the book and not familiar with the story, Danglars was the purser on the ship that he was I would call him like the vice captain. Like he was acting captain when the captain of the ship passed away. When they went to go to the isle where Napoleon was, I guess, resting, when in his, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? When he was basically kicked out of France, they sent him to a very specific island whose name escapes me. Sorry, my head is full of cheese and holes, apparently today. Anyway, so the captain died. He went ashore with a last tribute, and Danglars was the purser on the ship, the money Elba. Yes, thank you, the Isle of Elba. And so Danglars orchestrated pretty much everything. Like, he turned in the notice that got Dantes arrested in the first place on suspicion of being a Napoleon insurrectionist. And then Fernand is actually the cousin of Mercedes, his love interest, and he wanted Dantes out of the way so he could marry Mercedes, which is gross because they're related. Anyway. And then lastly, Villefort, he's especially bad. Like Danglars was just evil from the get-go, and Fernand was selfish and evil. But Villefort only cared about saving his own skin. So Villefort is the son of a Napoleon insurrectionist, and he's done everything in his power in the judicial circles to separate himself from his father. The letter that Dantes came back from the Isle of Elba was to his father from Napoleon. And so Villefort put him in jail in the Chateau d'If, which is, basically forever until they die, because he couldn't bring himself to kill Dantes, because Dantes didn't do anything wrong, but he couldn't let anyone know that Dantes had a letter to his father from Napoleon. So Villefort is his own special kind of evil. It's messy. Very, very messy. Let's see. He vowed his vengeance in his dungeon. This oath was no longer a vain threat, for the fattest sailor in the Mediterranean could never have overhauled the little tartan, which, with all sails set, was scudding before the wind in the direction of Leghorn. Dantes had not been a day on board before he realized who the people were with whom he was sailing. With his experience of the ways of seafaring men, it was not difficult to guess that the Jeune Amélie such was the name of Genoese tartan, was a smuggler. The skipper had received Dantes on board with a certain amount of misgivings. He was well known to all the custom officers of the coast, and as there was between these worthies and himself an interchange of the most cunning stratagems, he had at first thought that Dantes might be an emissary of the excise authorities, who had employed this ingenious means of penetrating some of the secrets of his trade. The skilful manner in which Dantes had maneuvered the little bark, however, had entirely reassured him, and when he saw the light smoke floating like a plume above the bastion of the Chateau d'If, and heard the distant report, it occurred to him for an instant that he had on board his vessel one for whom, as for the arrivals and departures of kings, they accord a salute of guns. This made him less uneasy, it must be owned, than if the newcomer had been a custom-house officer, but even this latter supposition disappeared like the first, when he beheld the perfect tranquillity of his recruit. Edmund, thus, had the advantage of knowing what the skipper was, without the skipper knowing what he was, and however much the old sailor and his crew tried to pump him, they extracted nothing more from him. He gave accurate descriptions of Naples and Malta, which he knew equally as well as Marseilles, and persisted stoutly in his first statement. Thus subtle as he was, the Genoese was duped by Edmund, whose gentle demeanour, nautical skill, and admirable dissimulation stood him in good stead. Moreover, it is possible that the Genoese was one of those shrewd persons who know nothing but what they should know, and believe nothing but what it suits them to believe. Such was the position when they reached Leghorn. As Dantes had landed at Leghorn very many times before, he knew a barber in the Via San Fernando, a barber in the Via San Fernando, and went straight there to have his hair and beard cut, for his comrades believed his vow was now fulfilled. When the operation was concluded, and Edmund's chin was smooth and his hair reduced to the fashionable length, he asked for a mirror. He was now, as we have said, 33 years of age, and the 14 years' imprisonment had worked a great change in his features. When he first went to the Chateau d'If, his face was the round, smiling, cheerful face of a happy young man whose early years had passed smoothly, and who looked forward to his future in the light of his past. All this was now changed. His oval face had lengthened, his smiling mouth had assumed the firm and determined lines indicative of resolution. His eyebrows had become arched beneath a single pensive wrinkle. His eyes had a look of deep sadness in them, and at times gloomy fires of misanthropy and hatred would sparkle in their depths. His skin, hidden from the light of day and the rays of the sun for so long, had assumed the pale and soft color which, when the face is encircled with black hair, makes the aristocratic beauty of the North. The deep learning he had acquired was reflected on his face in an expression of intelligent self-confidence. In addition, though naturally tall, he had acquired the healthy vigor of a body continuously concentrated all its force within itself. The elegance of his wiry, slender form had given way to the solidity of a round, muscular figure. His voice, too, had undergone a change. The continuous prayers, sobs, and imprecations had given it at times a strangely soft intonation, while at others it was gruff and almost hoarse. Moreover, his eyes, having been accustomed to twilight and darkness, had acquired the peculiar faculty of distinguishing objects in the dark, like those of the hyena and the wolf. Edmund smiled when he saw himself. It was impossible that even his best friend, if he had any friends left, would recognize him. He did not even recognize himself. The skipper of the Jeune Amélie, who was most anxious to keep amongst his crew such a valuable man as Dantes, offered to re-engage him. But Dantes had other plans in view, and would only accept for 3 months. The Jeune Amélie had a very active crew, ready to obey their master's orders, and he was accustomed to losing no time. He had barely been at Leghorn a week when the rounded sides of his vessel were stacked with printed muslins and prohibited cottons, English powders and tobacco, on which the excise authorities had forgotten to affix their seal. He had to get all this out of Leghorn free of duty and landed on the shores of Corsica, whence certain speculators undertook to transmit the cargo to France. They put off, and Dantes was once more sailing the blue ocean, which he had seen so often in his dreams while in confinement. The next morning, when the captain went on deck, which he always did at a very early hour, he found Dantes leaning over the bulwarks and gazing with a strange expression on his face at a pile of granite rocks that the rising sun had tinged a rosy hue. It was the Isle of Monte Cristo. The Jeune Amélie left it about 3/4 of a league to starboard and kept to her course for Corsica. Fortunately, Dantes had learnt to wait. He had waited 14 years for his liberty. Now that he was free, he could easily wait 6 months or a year for his treasure. Besides, was not this treasure chimerical, born in the diseased brain of a poor Abbe Faria? Had it not died with him? Is it true Cardinal Spada's letter was singularly convincing, and Dantes repeated it word for word from beginning to end. He had not forgotten a single syllable of it. 2 months and a half passed in similar trips, and he had become as skillful a coaster, seaman on the ship plying from port to port along a coast, as he had been a hardy sailor. He had stuck up an acquaintance with all the smugglers on the coast, and had learned all the Masonic signs by which these semi-pirates recognized each other. He had passed and repassed his Isle of Monte Cristo 20 times, but had never once found an opportunity of going ashore. He therefore made up his mind that immediately after the termination of his engagement with the skipper of the Jeune Amélie, he would hire a small bark on his own account. He was able to do so, for he had picked up 100 piastres or so on his 100 piastres or so on his different voyages, and under some pretext or other made for the Isle of Monte Cristo. Once there, he would be free to make his researches, perhaps not entirely free, for he was fully aware that he would be spied upon by those who accompanied him, but in this world one must risk something. Dantes was trying to solve the problem when one evening the skipper, who placed great confidence in him and was very anxious to keep him in his service, took him by his arm and led him to a tavern in Via del Oglio, where the aristocrats of the Leghorn smugglers were wont to congregate. It was here they discussed the affairs of the coast. This time a matter of great importance was debated. It concerned a ship laden with Turkish carpets, materials from the Levant, and cashmere shawls. They would have to find some neutral ground where an exchange could be made, and then endeavor to land the goods on the coast of France. The prize money would be enormous, and if they succeeded, it would mean 50 or 60 piastres for each one of the crew. The skipper proposed the Isle of Monte Cristo as a suitable place for discharging the cargo. Trembling with joy, Dantes got up to hide his emotion and paced round the smoky tavern, where all the known languages of the world are mixed into lingua franca, which is a hybrid language made up of elements of several tongues. Makes sense? When he joined the skipper again, it was already decided that they should touch at Monte Cristo, and that they should start on the expedition the following evening. When Edmund was consulted, he gave it as his opinion that the island afforded every possible security, and that if enterprises were to succeed, they should be carried out quickly. Nothing was changed in the program. They were to weigh anchor the next morning, and given a good sea and a favorable wind, they hoped to be in the waters of the neutral island by the evening of the following day. My goodness. Let's see. So we're about an hour in. I definitely am starting to feel it. Have a little crunchy wasabi almond. Very good. Let's see. I think I have maybe one more chapter in me. I can just feel how weak my voice is getting. So I'm debating a little bit. Hmm. Do I save my voice and we pick up where we left off next week, or do I push it and possibly injure my throat? Hmm. I do not know. But what I do know is that I'm going to eat a few more almonds and contemplate the actions. At this point, though, I do think what was the name of the boat, Jean Emily, the vessel landing on the island that he wants to go to is going to be very useful to Dante's. It's a little bit sad that his mentor, Faria, who was imprisoned, I think, 11 years before Dante's was, never got to see the riches of the governor of, no, I guess he would have been Cardinal Sparta, which in the first reading, the then Caesar of Rome and his son, who was, I think, a bishop, um, were got their heads together. I think it was like the Caesar and the Pope of Rome got their heads together and said, you know what, we should sell these cardinal positions to the highest bidder because we need money. And then Sparta and his family, you know, they were traders, like traders, like they were very wealthy merchants. And then I forget the name of the other house. Outbid everyone else, and they got the position. So the Caesar and the Pope invited them over for dinner. And the Sparta, one of the newly appointed cardinals who won the position through monetary means, figured something was up. So he tried to have his son be warned in advance, but the Pope and the the Caesar together killed Sparta. And so then his wealth, they were going to go in and forge a document that he was donating all of his wealth to the church, and they couldn't find his wealth, and his family had already moved the wealth to Monte Cristo, and then subsequent generations had this um what would I call it? It was like a special heirloom, and inside of it all that time was a note that Faria found when he received the last living Sparta, the previous um, aristocrat. Uh, he found the note inside of this heirloom, and he read it. And he figured it out, like where the treasure was supposed to be. But by the time he was going to go scoop it up, it's when the French Garda came to pick him up. Mm-hmm. Read book. It's very good. So it's just been kind of interesting to watch, Faria's story through Dante's eyes, and understand like how close he was to being beyond rich, like outstandingly millions and millions of francs rich, which in the 18, 20 whatever was a lot, like absurd amount, like billions of dollars rich. Like you could buy whole countries with this kind of money. So just kind of absurd. But I'm going to do one more, guys. I'm going to hang in there. I'm going to do one more chapter, long or short, and then I'm going to call it for today. I think I have enough energy to do that. So, friendly reminder between chapters, hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, curl up with a cozy blanket, whatever you need to enjoy. Mm. Yep. The Man in the Iron Mask one is a good one too. So you're talking about Three Musketeers, technically. Yeah. Alexander Dumas knew how to write, for sure. Um, he is very verbose. I will say that. But I mean, I went from what did I read last? I think I was reading Hamilton Wright's collection of fairy tales, which are, children's stories. So going from that to this is a little bit of a like I'm in elementary school to I'm a collegiate level international student. Slightly different. I'm struggling with some of the French words and the Italian too. I feel like Italian is easier for me to say, like the mouthfeel around Italian and Spanish words is easier for me to pronounce. Um, Whereas French has this beautiful, like, I don't know. I can't quite nail that one down. Okay. Let me do this. One more hydration and then we'll read. I just want to get away with not having to have you guys deal with any ads today. Since most of you have been kind enough to join me from raids, it's the least I can do. Um, I should keep in mind who's out there right now to raid into. Let me take a look. In the storytelling category, mm, story writing, story writing, a rerun by Hina. There's a few people here. That is in German. I don't know. That might be a bit of a jump. Looks like Alan is reading Clown in a Cornfield by Adam. That might be a good choice. Um, Anyone else I know? Let's check that. So Maiko is doing analysis of Ride the Existential Snake. Button Mashing Pro. I don't know that he's reading today. Maybe. I do think that we'll probably look at Alan depending on who's still there. A lot of Expedition 33. That's Nikto. 40K. Just chatting. Chill vibes. I just want chill vibes. Deus is playing Citizen Sleeper. Monster Hunter. Hunt. Dea, of course, is Hunt. All right, I have a few inkling ideas, but we'll play it a little, play it by ear if we get a little closer. It could be one of the other Underrealmers are going to be streaming here before too much longer. All right, we ball. Chapter 18: The Isle of Monte Cristo. At 7 o'clock the next evening, all was ready. At 10 minutes past 7, they rounded the lighthouse just as the beacon was kindled. The sea was calm, with a fresh wind blowing from the southeast. They sailed under a sky of azure, where God was also lighting up his lanterns, each one of which is a world. The vessel skimmed merrily over the water under full sail. There was not a rag of cloth that was not bellied in the wind. The Isle of Monte Cristo loomed large on the horizon. Toward 5 o'clock they saw a complete view of the island. They could see the smallest objects, thanks to the clearness of atmosphere peculiar to the light that is shed by the rays of the sun at sunset. Edmund gazed. and gazed on this mass of rocks, which was tinged with all the colors of twilight. From bright pink to deep blue, at times his face would become a deep red, and a blue mist passed before his eyes. Never did a gamester, whose whole fortune was staked on one throw of the dice, experience the anguish that Dantes felt. Night came. They landed at 10 o'clock. The Jeune Amélie was first at the rendezvous, notwithstanding his usual self-restraint. Dantes could control himself no longer. He jumped onto the shore and, like Brutus, he would have kissed the earth if he had dared. It was already dark night, but at 11 o'clock the moon rose over the ocean, silvering every little ripple, and, as she ascended, began to play on the mass of rocks, casting white cascades of light on this second Pelion, which is a mountain of some 5,400 feet in Thessaly, Greece. Okay, so it is very short. Yeah, okay. Dante's every thought was concentrated on finding Spada's grotto. Yeah, okay. Thought I skipped a page there. It was useless to search for it during the night, so he put off all investigations until the next day. Besides, a signal hoisted half a league at sea, to which the Jeune Amélie immediately answered with a similar signal, indicated that it was time to set to work. The latecomer, reassured by the signal that all was well, soon came in sight, silent and pale as a phantom, and cast an anchor within a cable's length of the shore. Then the work of unloading began. While working, Dantes continually reflected upon the shout of joy which one word of his would draw from the throats of all these men if he were to express aloud the thought that was incessantly in his mind. But far from revealing his precious secret, he feared he had already said too much, and that he had, by his comings and goings and his repeated questions, minute observations, and continual preoccupation, aroused suspicion. This was not the case, however, and when he took a gun and some powder and shot the next day, and manifested a desire to go and shoot some of the numerous wild kids they could see jumping from rock to rock, they attributed his proposed excursion to nothing more than a love of sport or a desire for solitude. Thus, Dantes, who 3 months previously had desired nothing more than liberty, was now no longer satisfied with that alone, and aspired after riches. He started forth, lost to view between two walls of rock. He followed a path hollowed out by continuous torrents, in which, in all probability, no human foot had ever trodden before. He approached the spot where he supposed the grottos to be situated, following the coast and examining the most minute objects with serious attention. He thought he noticed on several rocks incisions that had been made by man. Time, which casts its mantle of moss on all things material, and its mantle of oblivion on all things mortal, seemed to have respected these marks, which were made with a certain regularity, no doubt to indicate some trail. Now and then, however, they disappeared under tufts of myrtle, which grew in large clusters laden with flowers, and beneath parasitical lichen. Then Edmund was obliged to raise the branches or remove the moss to find the marks which were to lead him to his labyrinth. The marks had filled him with new hope. Surely it must have been the cardinal who had traced them, so that in the event of catastrophe, which even he had not foreseen would be so complete, they would serve as a guide to his nephew. This isolated spot was a most appropriate place for burying treasure. But Had these unfaithful signs not already attracted the attention of other eyes? Hi, Yuki, welcome in. The attention of other eyes than those for which they were meant? Or had the Isle of Gloomy Marvels faithfully kept its precious secret? About 60 yards from the harbor, it seemed to Dantes, who was still hidden from his companions by the inequalities of the ground, that the incisions ceased. They changed the font on Twitch, and you're not sure. You mean, is it Arial now? It does look different, but I can't quite pin down exactly what it is that I'm seeing. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it was sans serif from the get-go, but it does seem like the letters are smushed together a little bit more somehow.
Hydrate
I'm not
before
sure.
you dihydrate.
You got it.
Snack time!
And a big stretch. You got it. Care package. I might just make a Yuki specific care package.
Don't forget to stretch.
So you can save your points for other things. It's a thought. About 60 yards from the harbor, it seemed to Dantes, who was still hidden from his companions by the inequalities of the ground, that the incisions ceased. There was no grotto. A large round rock perched on a solid base seemed the only goal to which they led. He thought that, instead of having arrived at the end, he was perhaps only at the beginning, so he turned round and retraced his steps. In the meantime, his companions were preparing breakfast, and when it was ready, they fired a shot as a signal. Edmund at once came running toward them, just as they were all watching him jumping like a chamois from rock to rock. His foot gave way under him. They saw him stagger at the edge of a rock and disappear. They all rushed toward him with one bound, for, in spite of his superiority, they all loved him. They found him lying bleeding and half-conscious. They forced some rum down his throat, and this remedy, which had been so beneficial to him before, had the same good effect on him now. Edmund opened his eyes, complained of a sharp pain in his knee, a feeling of heaviness in his head, and unbearable pain in his back. They wanted to carry him to the beach, but directly they touched him, he declared with groans that he had not the strength. The old skipper urged Dantes to rise, for he was obliged to leave in the morning to deposit his cargo on the frontiers of Piedmont and France. Between Nice and Frejus, I guess. Between Nice and Frejus, Edmund made a superhuman effort to comply with his wishes, but, turning very white, he fell back each time with a moan. "He has broken his back," the skipper said in a low voice. "No matter, we will not forsake him. Let us carry him on board." Pardon? But Dantes declared that he would sooner die where he was than bear the agonizing pain than the slightest movement caused him. That the slightest movement caused him. "Very well," said the skipper. "Come what may, it shall not be said that we have deserted such a good shipmate as you. We will not leave till this evening." This proposal was a cause of great astonishment to the sailors, though no one opposed it. Dantes, however, would not allow such a serious violation of the rules of discipline on his behalf. "No, no," he said. "I have been clumsy, and it is only right that I should pay the penalty. Leave me a supply of biscuit, a gun, some powder, and shot for killing some kids, or maybe to use in my own defense." Contextually, he is talking about the goats. He is definitely not talking about human children, but goats. My goodness. "I have been clumsy, and it is only right that I should pay the penalty. Leave me a supply of biscuit, a gun, some powder, and shot for killing some kids, or maybe to use in my own defense. Also, a pickaxe so that I can make myself some sort of shelter in case you should be delayed in returning to fetch me. But you will die of hunger, replied the skipper. We cannot leave you like this, and on the other hand, we cannot stay. Leave me, go, Dantes cried out. Nothing could shake Dante's determination to remain and to remain alone. The smugglers gave him all he had asked for and left him. He dragged himself cautiously to the top of a rock which afforded him full view of the sea, whence he watched the tartan making ready to sail. He saw her weigh anchor, and balancing herself as gracefully as a gull ere it takes wing, put out to sea. Yes, Ghost. Ghost River, they did mean baby goat. At the end of the hour, she had completely disappeared from his view, and rising more agile and light of limb than the kids jumping about these rugged rocks among myrtle and mastic trees. Dantes took his gun in one hand, the pickaxe in the other, and ran toward the rock on which the incisions terminated. Now, he exclaimed, thinking of the story of the Arabian fisherman which Faria had related to him. Now, open sesame. Hey, Az, welcome in. Thank you. We've got quite a few people today. So that is where we're going to end it today, just because I am rough around the edges than I'd like to be. Pardon me. Reading continuously when you have a sore throat is difficult. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and call it here on chapter 19, which we read 3 chapters. I'm not mad at that for an hour and some minutes. So we'll go ahead and put a pin in that. And let's go see who's available. For those of you not familiar, I will do my best as. For those of you not familiar, 2 more wonderful, amazing people in chat. Yuki Sukamori is also part of Gen 2 of Underrealm. If you're not familiar with the community server, it's a growing VTuber group and community that works with, various creators, yada yada. It's a good place. It's a good vibe. And then King Azareth also, and Inky, just everybody. So King Azareth I met through Mukia and the Bone Caller. And then Inky I met also through, I think, peripherally also through Mukia and Lou and a few other people. Just amazing artist. If you guys aren't following Inky, you should be. I did my best. Yeah. I'm going to be doing a collab on Wednesday with Valis VT. There's a link there pinned in chat for Valis. He is still going through a housing crisis right now. He's only about 27% funded. So if anyone has any spare money lying around and they want to donate to a good cause, he and his daughter are being evicted at the end of the month of June. And so basically a little over a week, and they are in desperate need of anything and everything that anybody could help with. So let's go ahead and raid out to let's see who we got out there. Gordy's out there. Questions about the getting hot the graveyard. I have questions about that. Cabal, Red Claw. Oh, Arrow's doing some Elden Ring. That might be a little heavy, but and I know I've rated her recently. I think it'd be funny to raid into Alan, because Alan always raids into me, and he's reading The Clown in a Cornfield. And I think it would be nice to be able to go say hello to Alan and Bill the duck. Alan is the I guess humanoid, and the duck is named Bill, who is a beautiful little plushie and super cute. So let's go ahead and raid over into Alan and go say hello. So real quick. Ah, Thank you for the lick, Zinky. Let's see here. This is do exclamation point. You are very welcome. We'll do exclamation point raid. So we got the read and raid. We'll just grab that sort of simple. All followers can use the raid emote, and we'll go ahead and raid over to Alan. And it was a pleasure reading for you all, and thank you for sticking around. I know I don't sound my best, so it's been a pleasure. So we'll hang tight, and we'll raid over to Alan and Bill the Duck.